knew it was wrong before you did it. That's the part nobody talks about, not the regret after, not the justification during, the moment before. That brief, clear window where some part of you saw exactly what was about to happen and said nothing good comes from this. And you did it anyway. Not because you didn't know, not because you were confused about what the right thing was. You knew. You chose the other thing. And now you're here, in the aftermath, asking the same question you've asked before. Why do I keep doing this? Not what happened this time. Not what you could have done differently in this specific situation. The deeper question. The one underneath all the individual instances. Why does this keep happening at all? Why does knowing the right thing so rarely translate into doing it? Why is there such a persistent, maddening gap between the person you understand yourself to be and the person your behavior keeps revealing? This is one of the oldest questions in philosophy. Aristotle called it akrasia, acting against your own better judgment. The Greeks considered it one of the most puzzling features of human experience because it seems logically impossible. If you know what's right and you have the ability to do it, why would you choose otherwise? And yet here you are. Here we all are. The answer Plato gave is not the one most people expect. It's not about weakness of character. It's not about insufficient motivation. It's not a problem you can solve by wanting it more or trying harder or building better habits. It's a problem of structure, the structure of the self. Plato believed the soul is not one thing. Most of us operate as though it is. We talk about ourselves as if there's a single unified I making decisions, setting goals, breaking promises. When we fail to follow through, we blame that I. We say, I wasn't disciplined enough. I gave in. I let myself down. But Plato's insight, developed across several dialogues, but most completely in the Republic, was that this single unified I is an illusion. Or more precisely, it's a simplification that hides what's actually happening. The soul, he argued, is composed of three fundamentally different parts, three distinct sources of motivation that operate on different timescales, respond to different incentives, and want entirely different things. He called them the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. And the reason you keep doing what you know is wrong is not that one of these parts is broken. It's that they're at war with each other. And the wrong one keeps winning. Start with the part that feels most like you, the rational soul. This is the part that understands consequences, the part that makes plans and sets intentions and sees clearly how choices connect to outcomes. It's the part that reads about Plato at whatever hour you're watching this and nods along, recognizing the truth of what's being described. The rational soul is genuinely intelligent. It can map the future accurately. It knows that the short relief is not worth the long cost. It knows that the pattern you keep repeating is a pattern. It knows with clarity what a better version of your life would look like and what choices would move you toward it. The problem is that the rational soul is not the only voter. And in many of the moments that matter most, it is badly outnumbered. Plato noticed something that neuroscience has since confirmed. Reason is slow. It requires favorable conditions to operate at its best. It needs time and quiet and the absence of strong competing signals. At 9 a.m. on a rested morning, reason is formidable. At midnight, when you're stressed and tired and something easy and relieving is right in front of you, reason is barely in the room. This is not a personal failing. It's architecture. The rational soul was not designed to win every moment by force. It was designed to lead by agreement. And when the other two parts of the soul aren't in agreement, they don't wait for permission. They act. And reason watches, clearly understanding what's happening, unable to stop it. That experience of watching yourself make a choice you know is wrong, almost as if from a slight distance, almost as if the person doing it isn't entirely you. That's exactly what it feels like when the rational soul has lost the vote. The second part is the one that causes the most confusion, because we don't have a clean word for it in modern English. Plato called it Thumos. It's usually translated as spirit, but that translation loses something important. Thumos is not spirituality. It's not calmness or transcendence. Thumos is fire. It's the part of you that feels pride and shame, the part that cares ferociously about how you are perceived and how you perceive yourself. the part that generates the burning sensation in your chest when someone disrespects you, or when you disrespect yourself, or when you fall short of a standard you've set. Thumos is why you can't let a certain comment go even when reason tells you it doesn't matter. It's why you work past exhaustion on something you believe in. It's why betrayal hurts in a way that goes beyond practical consequences. It's why being ignored sometimes stings more than being attacked. It's the source of your courage, your dignity, your refusal to be diminished. Without it, you would have no fire to bring to anything, no will to fight for what matters, no capacity for genuine commitment. But Thumos is also the part of you that engineers self-sabotage in ways that look nothing like laziness. Because Thumos carries wounds. Every experience of public failure, every moment of humiliation, every time you tried and were seen to fail, every relationship where you were not chosen, every version of yourself that was rejected leaves a mark on Thumos. And Thumos, unlike reason, does not process these experiences analytically. It absorbs them as identity, as evidence about what you are and what you're capable of and what will happen if you try again. So when you approach something significant, something where success would be real and visible, Thumos sometimes pulls the emergency brake, not because it wants you to fail, but because it's terrified of being seen to fail again. The self-sabotage isn't laziness, it's protection. The wound in Thumos is choosing certain failure now over the possibility of devastating failure later. And reason watches this happen, clearly seeing the mechanism, unable to stop it because Thumos is not responding to logic. Thumos responds to trust, to evidence built slowly over time that the direction is safe and the effort is worthy. You cannot argue Thumos out of a wound. You can only show it through repeated action that the thing it fears is survivable. The third part is the oldest, in every sense of the word, the appetitive soul. This is the part that wants, not in the complex emotional way that Thumos wants recognition and dignity, in the older, simpler, more animal way. Food, warmth, pleasure, relief, the end of discomfort, the resolution of tension, whatever form hunger takes in this moment. Appetite is not evil. Plato was clear about this, and it's worth being clear about it too. Appetite is the engine. It's the raw energy that keeps you alive and moving. Without it, there is no motivation at all. The body would not eat, would not rest, would not seek anything. But appetite operates on a completely different clock than reason. Reason thinks in years, in consequences, in the arc of a life. Appetite thinks in minutes, in this moment, in the specific sensation that is available right now versus the abstract future benefit that might arrive later if you make the harder choice today. And appetite has no natural ceiling. Reason wants specific things and can be satisfied. Thumos wants recognition and can, in principle, feel it has enough. Appetite satisfies, briefly, and then wants again. There is no amount of food that permanently resolves hunger. No amount of pleasure that permanently resolves the desire for pleasure. The relief it offers is always temporary, and the wanting always returns, sometimes stronger, for having been indulged. This is the part of you that reaches for the phone before a conscious decision has been made. That redirects an evening meant for something meaningful towards something easy and numbing. That turns one exception into a pattern, so gradually you barely notice it happening until the pattern is established and the exception has become the rule. And like Thumos, appetite doesn't respond to argument. It responds to acknowledgement and redirection. Ignore it, and it gets louder. Suppress it entirely, and it accumulates pressure that eventually releases in a way you don't control. Work with it honestly. Acknowledge what it wants. Give it what it genuinely needs while redirecting it away from what it only thinks it wants, and it becomes manageable. But that requires a skill most people were never taught. Here is the specific mechanism by which you do what you know is wrong. It's not mysterious. Once you see it, you'll recognize it immediately. A situation arises. It might be a temptation, a conflict, a moment of pressure, an opportunity to take the easy path or the right path. In that moment, All three parts of the soul register the situation and respond simultaneously. But they respond differently, and they don't coordinate. Reason sees the full picture, the consequences, the pattern, the better choice. Reason generates a clear recommendation. This is what you should do. But simultaneously, appetite has already registered something it wants. The relief, the pleasure, the end of the current discomfort. It doesn't wait for reason's analysis. It's already pulling. And Thumos has registered a threat, or an opportunity for recognition, or the echo of an old wound. It's already generating heat, already moving toward defending itself or proving something or retreating from the possibility of exposure. By the time reason has finished forming its recommendation, the other two parts have already begun acting on theirs. They have a head start, and they have more immediate access to behavior than reason does because they operate on older, faster pathways. This is not a metaphor. This is a description of what actually happens in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, which corresponds most closely to what Plato called reason, is the most recently evolved structure. It is the last to develop in childhood and the first to go offline under stress, fatigue, or strong emotional activation. The limbic system, corresponding to Thumos, and the brainstem reward circuitry, corresponding to appetite, are older and faster and have direct access to behavior in ways the prefrontal cortex does not. When you act against your better judgment, you are not overriding your intelligence. You are experiencing your intelligence being outrun by systems that were already moving before it had a chance to think. This is why willpower, framed as reason forcing its way through, is such an unreliable strategy. You're trying to win a race that the other parts of the soul started before you heard the starting gun. The reason most self-improvement fails is that it treats this as a simple problem with a simple solution. Want it more. Try harder. Build better habits. Create accountability systems. Remove temptations from your environment. Some of these things help in limited ways, in certain conditions, but none of them address the root issue, which is that appetite and Thumos are not opposing forces to be overcome. They are parts of you to be integrated. Plato was precise about this in a way that most modern psychology has only recently begun to catch up to. He did not say the solution was to silence desire. He said the solution was to order it. The well-ordered soul is not the soul that has eliminated appetite and Thumos. It is the soul where reason genuinely leads, where Thumos is directed toward worthy goals, and where appetite is acknowledged and redirected rather than suppressed or indulged. This is a completely different project than most people undertake when they try to change their behavior. Instead of asking, "How do I stop wanting this?" the question becomes, "How do I work with the part of me that wants this while moving towards something better?" Instead of asking, "How do I override my emotions?" the question becomes, "What is the wounded part of my soul actually trying to protect, and can I address that more honestly?" Instead of asking, "How do I become more disciplined?" the question becomes, "Which part of me is actually running things right now, and is that appropriate for this moment?" These are not easier questions, but they are better ones, because they address what's actually happening instead of fighting a version of yourself that you've misunderstood. There is a practical dimension to this that Plato described through the image of the charioteer. The charioteer is reason. The noble horse is Thumos. The unruly horse is appetite. The charioteer's job is not to destroy either horse. Without them, the chariot doesn't move. The job is to drive them, to direct the noble horse towards something worthy, to rein the unruly horse without breaking it, because its power is exactly what moves everything forward. And here is what good driving actually looks like in the moments that matter. The first thing is recognition. Before you can govern the three parts, you have to know which one is speaking. This is harder than it sounds because each part has learned to impersonate the others. Appetite arrives, dressed as logic. I deserve this. I have worked hard. This is a reasonable exception. I'll start fresh tomorrow. These all sound like reason. They have the syntax of rational thought. But the conclusion was not arrived at through genuine analysis. It was generated by appetite and handed to the language centers of the brain to dress up in rational clothing. Thumos does the same thing. It arrives dressed as principle. This isn't about my ego. This is genuinely unfair. I'm not being defensive. I'm standing up for something important. Sometimes these things are true, but often they're Thumos protecting a wound and borrowing the language of principle to make the protection feel justified. The practice of recognition is learning to feel the difference from the inside. And the difference does have a texture once you know to look for it. When appetite is speaking, the wanting feels urgent and immediate. It's focused on right now, on relief, on the resolution of a current discomfort. It tends to be less interested in what comes after. When you probe it, it resists imagining the future clearly. When Thumos is speaking, there's heat. There's something at stake beyond the practical outcome. Something about how this makes you look, or what it means about you, or what it would say about you if you backed down. When you probe it, it tends to be protecting something that connects to old experiences of being seen and judged. When reason is genuinely speaking, the wanting is quieter. It doesn't have the urgency of appetite or the heat of Thumos. It can wait. It remains present after the immediate moment has passed. A want generated by genuine reason will still be there tomorrow and next week, and when the emotional weather has changed. You don't need to act on this recognition immediately. Simply identifying which part is speaking creates a small but real gap between the impulse and the action. And that gap is where choice lives. The second practice is negotiation rather than suppression. This is where most attempts at self-governance fail. They frame the problem as reason against appetite and emotion. They try to win by force, white-knuckle discipline, rigid rules, complete avoidance, maximum willpower. And it works until it doesn't. And when it fails, it tends to fail completely, because what you've been doing is not governing appetite and Thumos. You've been pressurizing them, and pressure, when it releases without control. The alternative is to acknowledge what the other parts want, while declining to simply give it to them. When appetite is pulling strongly, the move is not to pretend it isn't there. It's to address it directly, internally, honestly. I know you're tired. I know you want relief right now. I'm not ignoring you. We are going to do this thing first, and then we will rest. And I am not going to forget that you need that. The acknowledgement is real. The redirection is firm. It sounds unusual to speak to yourself this way. But what you're actually doing is integration. You're not splitting yourself into the good part and the bad part, and trying to defeat the bad part. You're including all the parts in the conversation while making clear that reason is the one with the steering wheel. Thumos requires something different. It doesn't need comfort. It needs to feel that the direction is worthy, that the effort it's being asked to make is for something that deserves it. This is why people with strong Thumos can endure extraordinary difficulty when they believe in what they're doing, and collapse almost instantly when they lose that conviction. The noble horse runs hard for a destination it respects. It stops dead for one it doesn't. The negotiation with Thumos is not calm down. It's here is why this matters. And this has to be genuine. Thumos can detect performance. If you don't actually believe the direction is worthy, if you're pursuing something because you think you should, rather than because something real in you is drawn to it, Thumos will not cooperate. No amount of external motivation or manufactured urgency substitutes for genuine conviction. If Thumos keeps refusing, it's worth asking whether it's wounded or whether it's right. Sometimes the self-sabotage is not a wound to be healed. Sometimes it's accurate information that the direction is wrong. The third practice is recovery rather than perfection, because you will lose the reins. This is not pessimism. This is an honest description of what the human soul is. You will act against your better judgment again. You will be in the middle of doing something you know is wrong and be unable to stop. You will make the choice you've made before, even as the part of you that's watching clearly says, "Not again." The question is not how to prevent this entirely. The question is how quickly you return to order afterward. Plato did not describe the well-ordered soul as one that never falls into disorder. He described it as one that returns. The direction is the thing, not the perfect execution. And the return has a specific quality that distinguishes it from two things that look like recovery but aren't. The first thing it's not is self-punishment. Self-punishment feels like accountability, but it's Thumos turned inward. It's the wounded part of the soul treating itself as the source of the failure, rather than understanding the structural dynamics that produced the choice. Self-punishment makes you feel like you're doing something about the problem. You're not. You're using the energy that could go into actual change to perform contrition instead. The second thing it's not is elaborate justification. Justification is appetite and Thumos collaborating to protect themselves from the clarity of reason. It's the retrospective construction of a story that makes the choice look more defensible than it was. You can feel justification happening because it has the texture of argument, of building a case, of needing to convince someone, even if that someone is only yourself. Genuine recovery is neither of these. It's simpler and more humble than both. It's, I see what happened. I understand which part was driving and why. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, or that it doesn't matter. And we're continuing, and then continuing. The length of time between the fall and the return is what changes with practice, not the falling. The falling is human. But the person who spends 3 weeks in self-punishment and justification before returning to the path is in a fundamentally different relationship to their own soul than the person who sees what happened, understands it, and returns the same day. That speed of return is what Plato meant by the disciplined soul. Not the soul that never fails, the soul that has a short distance back to itself. There is something underneath all of this that's worth naming directly. The reason you keep doing what you know is wrong is partly structural, as we've described. 3 parts of the soul with different timescales and different motivations, and imperfect coordination. That's real, and it explains a great deal. But there's also something else. Most people have never genuinely committed to a direction that all 3 parts of the soul agree on. They've committed to directions that reason chose, that looked right on paper, that seemed like what they should want, that other people approved of. But Thumos was never fully bought in. It never felt like something worthy of its fire. And appetite was never really addressed. It was just expected to comply. And a direction that only one part of the soul has chosen is not a stable direction. It will be constantly undermined by the other 2 parts, not out of weakness, but because they were never genuinely consulted. The person who seems to have extraordinary discipline is not the person who has defeated their appetite and Thumos through sheer force of reason. They are the person who has found a direction that all 3 parts genuinely want, where the work itself satisfies something appetite needs, where the goal resonates with something Thumos considers worthy, where reason can see clearly that the path makes sense. When all 3 parts are aligned, discipline, as we usually conceive it, almost disappears, because you're not overriding yourself to do the thing. You're not fighting yourself to keep the commitment. All of you wants the thing. That alignment is rare. Most people never find it because they never look for it that way. They look for what they should want, or what would impress people, or what seems achievable, or what would solve a specific problem. The question Plato is really asking is different. What direction would your reason endorse, your Thumos respect, and your appetite be at peace with? That's a harder question. It requires genuine self-knowledge. It requires being honest about what Thumos is wounded by, and what it actually finds worthy. It requires knowing what appetite genuinely needs, as opposed to what it reaches for out of habit or numbing. It requires reason to be honest enough to question whether the goals it has set are actually right or just coherent. But a life oriented around that question moves differently, with less friction, with less constant internal war, with something that feels less like discipline and more like integrity. The pattern you keep repeating is not evidence of who you are. It's evidence of a misalignment between parts of yourself that were never properly introduced to each other. You are not the part that knows better. You are not the part that keeps failing. You are not the fire or the hunger or the plan. You are the soul that contains all of these, and the soul that contains them has the capacity to order them, not perfectly, not permanently, not without falling and returning and falling again, but in a direction toward something real, with increasing coherence between what you know and what you do and what you feel. That coherence is not a destination you arrive at. It's a practice you return to. Every time you pause and ask, which part of me is speaking right now, you are practicing. Every time you negotiate with appetite honestly, instead of pretending you don't want what you want, you are practicing. Every time Thumos pulls back from something worthy and you feel the wound underneath and address it with patience rather than force, you are practicing. Every time you fall and return without weeks of self-punishment in between, you are practicing. And the soul that practices this over time, over years, through all the failures and returns and genuine moments of alignment, that soul becomes something. Not perfect, not invulnerable, ordered. And Plato believed, with the kind of conviction that comes from having genuinely thought something through to the end, that the ordered soul is the closest a human being can come to the life they were designed for. Not because order feels good, though sometimes it does, but because the alternative, the soul at war with itself, the life spent doing what you know is wrong and asking afterward why, the perpetual gap between who you understand yourself to be and what your behavior keeps revealing, that is its own kind of suffering. And it is not inevitable. The three parts of your soul have been fighting because no one has tried to govern them properly. You can start now, not from the beginning, from here. That's enough.